Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of Macro Pro and Friends. Today, we're doing a special three-part series on cops and claims. And when you see that Jeff has just popped on, he's going to be there. But before we get started, I'm joined by Wendy Stevens, who is our Northern California manager and trainer for our clients. So, Wendy, how are you?
I'm doing well, Diane. How are you?
I am fantastic. Well, you know, now we're doing summer claims. Well, what comes with summer school? What comes with that would be vacation, right? After summer school, we always did a vacation. Have you been on vacation?
I have. Last week I was on vacation. My husband and I took our RV and we went to 3 national parks. We went to Grand Tetons, Yellowstone, and Zion National Park. And they were just beautiful, and the natural beauty that we have in our country is amazing, as well as the people. We have such great people here as well.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm wondering, I see we have a nice big audience right now. So how many of you have been to any of the 3 places that Wendy just spoke about? We got 3 national parks. So I'd love to know how many of you have gone, and then maybe you can put in the box who you or which park you've been to. So I know you and I both have motorhomes, and it always reminds me when I hear about national parks, the movie from Robin Williams, RV. Such a great movie. That was such a great movie. I'm going to go ahead and get started now and do some housekeeping, and then Wendy will have you introduce Jeff. So we're going to start out by reminding everybody that you will be receiving 1 CEU credit. You should get that within 2 hours. If you have difficulties opening it, please contact your IT department because it's more than likely a firewall. You do need to be logged on, so as long as you use the link and we can see your name in the attendance box, then you will be receiving your credits for today. We have handouts with this webinar, so you just need to download them. It's under handouts, and there are 3 of them there for you, but I'm sure you'll want to refer back to some of this information. If you have any questions at all, Wendy and I are happy to ask just those questions. So on the control console, you will see a question area, and we will monitor that. And I see a lot of you are already answering the question, and many of you said, no, they haven't, but someone said they've been to the Grand Tetons. Lori has, and Stephanie says not any at all at this point. So Stephanie, I hope you get there. I'm sure you will. All right, and then you get to watch this program once again on the Macro Pro YouTube channel. So Wendy, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thanks, Diane. I appreciate that. So I would like to welcome Jeff Nix joining us today. He's doing a 3-part series on the mental health of police officers. Jeff's experience is a 30-year police and fire professional. He was with the city of Rohnert Park, which is one of 2 agencies in the state of California where officers are trained and work in both police and fire disciplines. While at the city of Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety, Jeff was a police lieutenant and a fire battalion chief. He specialized in police and fire operations, criminal investigations, emergency management, peer support, and officer wellness. Jeff holds a bachelor's degree in criminal justice management, California Police Officer Standards and Training Management Certificate, and he's a graduate of the Sherman Block California Post Supervisory Leadership Institute. Jeff received the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety Medal of Valor, and he also was the recipient 3 times of the Life-Saving Medal. Jeff is currently an adjunct faculty member and basic police academy coordinator at the Santa Rosa Junior College Public Safety Training Center. So Jeff, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, that's great. Wendy, thank you so much. And Diane, thank you so much for having me today. And if I could see everybody's faces out there, I would look all of you in the eye and say thank you so much for being interested in this topic. This topic is near and dear to me. Over the course of my 30-year career, I've certainly dealt with my own challenges and certainly have been party to addressing some of the needs of my fellow officers and firefighters. So when I speak to you today, I'm speaking on behalf of my profession, since it's dual roles as police lieutenant, fire battalion chief. So I hope you can understand that a lot of the things I'm going to say are police heavy, but it certainly doesn't put aside the same things from the police side, or from the fire side. I'm sorry. But today I'm going to talk to you about the why behind police officers' mental health, and I'm not going to try and sell you on or sell you a bill of goods that makes you think every police officer or firefighter is a great guy. But I'm going to speak from my heart, and I'm going to use my 30 years of experience to guide us through this presentation. I do encourage you to, if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask. I will try and address those as we go on, but I want to get into the meat and potatoes of our presentation today. And our objectives that I want to cover today is who becomes a police officer, especially this day and age. They're not knocking down the doors like they were 30 years ago when I signed up to be a police officer and or a firefighter. How are police officers wired? We're going to discuss that, that we're wired a little differently than a lot of other people and a lot of other professions. And thank goodness that everyone's wired a little bit differently. I'm going to talk about the types of call that impact officers' mental health, and that's when we're going to address or talk about some of the war stories that I've had over the last 30 years or so. And then what do we do when in the immediate aftermath of a critical incident or something that we know is going to affect an officer's mental health, whether it's an immediate issue or something that may be chronic, over a period of time. But what do we do to address those needs? So let's dive into this. In this day and age, who becomes a police officer? It's interesting, as I teach at the academy, and I've been doing that for about 20 years now. And I've noticed over the past 20 years the influx of police officers that are interested in the job and why they are interested in becoming a police officer. Back when I signed up to go to the academy, boy, there was a feeling that I had that I just wanted to serve. I had a long conversation with my wife, and we talked about I was in the insurance business before this, and gosh, I hated every minute of it. And I liked the people, I just didn't like the work. And so I wanted more of a sense of service, and I wanted to look at longevity and what that looked like in my career, and I wanted stability, and working a government job such as a police officer provided me with all those things, and a decent salary, a good pension, and so my wife and I decided, well, I kind of strong-armed her a little bit, but we decided that we were going to take the plunge, and that's what I wanted to do. Nowadays, it's not quite like that. It used to be out of every 100 applicants that applied for a position, we'd hire one. And in my experience in Rohnert Park, I was in charge of our hiring and recruitment for a while. And over the last, I want to say 18 months or so, we'd have these entry-level recruitments, and we'd have 5 positions available within our agency. And we would get approximately 12 to maybe 20 people that showed up for an entry-level position for 5 positions, which, I mean, the odds are great, but why aren't we getting the draw? What's happening with the hiring process, and why do people not want to do this job anymore? And I tell you, one of the main reasons is the legal requirements that we're under now that we weren't, 30 years ago. And I do think there's some positives to the changes that were made, the body-worn cameras, all those things that help benefit law enforcement today, I think are great. But 30 years ago, no one could ever imagine having a body-worn camera on every second of every day that we work. So, who wants to become a police officer at this time? And what we're seeing and what is kind of trending right now is we're getting a lot of military veterans. So we currently in the police academy that I'm at, we have 45 people in the class, and there are, I want to say 17 of those are military veterans. And so I asked them, hey, why do you want to do this? And one of those guys was a Navy SEAL. And he had done his time in the Navy, and God bless him for doing that. But he still wanted that sense of being able to serve. And so, the military veterans, they come in, they're used to the chain of command and used to, the active service. And so they come to a law enforcement agency that is a paramilitary organization. We work in a command structure, and we have a rank structure, and so it's an easy transition for them to come from the military into to law enforcement. The next folks that we see are which we labeled legacy law enforcement, and those are the sons and daughters, the nieces and nephews of those that have served in a law enforcement capacity. And so they want to do what their moms and dads have done, or their aunts and uncles have done. And so we're getting those types of people that enroll in the academy and that want to sign up for this job. And then I think one of the best groups that we draw from are your average Joe or Jolene. They're the people that come with very diverse backgrounds, and hopefully are residents within our own communities, and that we can get them to integrate into their community, to give back to their community, and provide that sense of service that that is necessary. And so bringing these three groups together, it does complete a pretty diverse group. But when we're dealing about, or when we're talking about who becomes a police officer, oftentimes the military folks, they kind of have that integrated in their mind. The legacy law enforcement, they've grown up in the home where they know and they realize that they're going to be working on the weekends, they're going to be working at nights, they're going to be working on their anniversary or their birthdays or their spouse or significant other's birthdays. So they understand, but this is where it's kind of a rub to some respect, is the average Joe or Jolene just off the street that thinks that, hey, being a cop is going to be cool. I've watched every TV show. We could solve crimes in 45 minutes. This is going to be awesome. Sometimes there's a rude awakening there when they're not solving crimes in 45 minutes. People do talk back to them, and so there's a learning curve there. But this is the group that we're drawing from now, and so we're trying to pump up our staffing levels, and it's not just Rohnert Park. All of my peers and other agencies across multiple counties are having the same issues with hiring. I know in San Francisco, I believe they're down about 600 officers, and their last graduating academy class was 12 people. And so how do you catch up? So how does this all fit in with mental health? When we have 12 people signing up for 5 positions, and what happens when those vacant positions are not being filled? There's officers that are working, overtime, an abundance of overtime, and that's mandatory overtime. And so that has an impact on our mental health. it's changed over the course of a 30-year period where, gosh, if I were to work overtime or understood that I was going to make more money doing something that I absolutely loved, I would have done it for a sack lunch. But now you're going to pay me to do something that I love, and so which is a way different mentality than the officers we have today, where there's more of that, and we all heard about it, that sense of entitlement that is drawn. What's the agency going to do for me, and not what I'm going to do for the agency. And so there's some difficulties. I still believe it's the greatest job ever, but you know, we're not getting the draw of the applicants like we used to, and so that puts the burden on those that have been here for a long time. That puts a burden on those that have been in the job for 3 to 5 years, and so it's an interesting dilemma or interesting spot that we're in right now in regards to that. So let's talk about you know, how we're wired. We talked a little bit about the military folks. You know, they're wired, or they were trained to be wired a little bit differently. But let's talk about maybe some things that everybody in this webinar can understand. You know, CrossFit. I'm a believer. It works. We can probably say that it's a cult in its own mind, because if you're a CrossFitter, you have your own group, your own friends. You are in it, and I think that CrossFit folks that are in it to the bitter end, they're wired a little different. I have a coworker at the academy that is a marathon runner. He's run Boston 6 times and a bunch of different marathons. I think he's run about 15 marathons. Well, he's graduated from marathons to the ultras, which are the 100 miles or 120 miles. And this guy is wired different. I've got better things to do in my life than to spend not just 4 hours, but 6, 8, 12 hours running. So that dude is wired different, but that's what his makeup is. Navy SEALs, they are wired different, and thank goodness they are. Thank goodness that they are able to do that job and go through the training that they go through. You know, it's an interesting thing when you look at how police officers are wired. You know, we're wired or trained to be wired to run to the threat instead of running away from it. And so, you know, people say that that's a little odd. I love the adrenaline. I love, you know, the action. I love that fulfillment of serving my community, and you know, and at the risk of putting myself in harm's way, I would just go get the job done, and my peers would do the same thing. All of us know police officers, and most of the time, you know, outside of work, they're pretty, you know, pretty good guys, have a good sense of humor, and I mean men and women, but on the job, they're very cynical. And when I first started my career in law enforcement and the fire service, boy, I thought everyone was good and no one would lie to me, and it was awesome. I got to go, you know, basically play with my friends, and then I realized that people lied to me. People didn't want to go to jail and weren't going along with the program all the time, and so that creates that cynicism that oftentimes law enforcement officers have. We become numb to, you know, certain things because we have a job to do, and so there's certain sensitivities that maybe a regular citizen would have that law enforcement officers don't have. And I think that's something that occurs over time, and it's unfortunate that occurs, but that's just, sometimes we just have to keep those things in check. Also, and I know all of you realize and understand that there's a lot of ego that comes from being a police officer. Not that, and I can speak for myself. You know, has my ego been inflated when I was in my early 30s? Oh gosh, yeah, I could take off my uniform, there'd be a big S on my shirt, and my ego was through the roof. And then it only takes a couple times that you get your butt handed to you that you realize you're not bigger than life, and so those humbling experiences help teach us. But we all know the cops that are their egos are bigger than they are, and they're difficult to talk to, and it's a rough situation when we allow the egos to get involved. You know, I kind of want to address what the slide is saying. You know, it talks about, you know, our training, and this kind of stems on why we become cynical. And unfortunately, you know, I'm going to digress one more second. Is unfortunately, because of the ego and the authority that police officers are given, oftentimes police officers think they're better than everybody else. And the last time I checked, we put our pants on the same way everybody else does, and we just have a different job than everybody else. And so we're trying our best at the academy levels to keep them humble. I'll tell you a story that I tell all the brand new police academy recruits that come in. Is on their first day of the academy, I tell them, don't ever forget this day. All of you are looking around, and you're kind of sizing each other up, and your belts are on backwards, and your holsters are on upside down, and your handcuffs are in the wrong positions. And I refer to that being a soup sandwich. And then in 20 weeks, you're going to leave this academy basically in a very dangerous mode, because you think you know everything. But I don't ever want you to forget that very first day. I want you to be humble and teachable. And then I guarantee that in 2 or 3 years, when you come back to a graduation ceremony at the academy, you're going to walk by every one of the instructors that taught you, that you revered as instructors and mentors while you attended the academy. You're going to walk by without saying hello. And you know, the eyes of the recruits, the brand new recruits, are wide open, and they can't believe it. But I said, your ego is going to get in the way. You're going to think, yeah, that was just a phase of my life and a period of my life, that I'm way beyond that now, and I know everything. And so I try and remind them to stay humble and teachable throughout their entire career, which is difficult with the amount of authority and power that's given from being a sworn officer. So in regards to the academy training, you know, unfortunately, in regards to the mental health aspect of it, and I do think the egos and those type of things are mental health issues as well. The cynicism is a mental health issue as well, because if we let those take over, my gosh, we're just hard to manage, to work with, to work for. It can be a real nightmare. But
If I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I have a question.
Yes.
The question is, how do you get them to stop thinking that they're entitled? You're talking about the egos, et cetera, being part of mental health. How, maybe at the academy level, do you start getting recruits to think maybe they're not quite so entitled as they think they are?
When you broke up on my end a little bit, but I think I understood your question. If I go off the rails here, you may have to ask it again. But you know, it is a slow process, and you're really changing a culture. Now things have changed since I, you know, over the last 30 years. And we'll dive into this a little bit more further into the presentation. But you know, it used to be, gosh, if you get hurt or you went on a bad call, suck it up and get back out there. There's more calls waiting, and we didn't address, you know, somebody's mental health. That was a sign of weakness. But now at the academy level, we're addressing those things. We're making it less of a high stress academy. So all of you have seen videos or maybe even know people that have gone through a high stress police academy where you have those drill sergeant type recruit training officers that come out and they're yelling and screaming and well, that may have worked 30 years ago on people, but we now have a different group of individuals and different way we learn, and so we're trying to address that as we teach. And you know, our philosophy at the academy that I teach at is more of a mentorship. And yeah, there's required learning domains that they have to have and have to pass tests to graduate. But we're trying to teach them to be better humans as well, instead of just driving down their throat, you're a cop, you know, make people do what you say, and that's it. Well, those days are long gone, and so we are trying to address that and be more of mentors to these new recruits. And so, what does that mean as far as who we're hiring to be instructors at the academies now? And a lot of these guys, I mean, I've worked 30 years and I was a lieutenant for 4 years. And so really when you become a lieutenant, you stop being a cop because you're pushing paper the whole time. So we have people that are, you know, we try and get as many people that are current, you know, working the job and that are relevant and know how to talk to people that are new in the profession. And so we're using those strengths to teach these new officers in the academy. And we stress the fact that nobody in this room is better than anybody else. We're only as good as the people next to us and in front and back of us. So it is one person at a time. You know, I heard a quote one time that says, I may not be able to change the world, but I may be able to change one person in the world. And so we kind of do that one person at a time, and hopefully that becomes contagious with the others. Did I strike out, or did I do okay on that, Wendy?
I think you did just fine. Thank you.
Yeah, you did just fine.
Okay.
Thanks, Jeff.
Sure. So back to the academy training and how that can impact or be crippling to the newer officers that are going out on the street. And you know, all of the academy training, as far as I know, well, I know at the academy that I teach out, we've never killed anybody during our training. And we have a lot of scenario-based training, and everything is pretty static. There's no threats. We use you know, simulated handguns and rifles and knives and you know, all those things. So there's no threat of being hurt. Now, so they get comfortable with the equipment, but as soon as they hit the street on their field training programs, they're playing for keeps. And there are you know, situations that they're thrown into right out of the chute where they're having to put hands on somebody for the first time, where instead of standing in a defensive tactics classroom where you're basically handing somebody your arm saying, put handcuffs on me, use this technique without any resistance, you know, and it's just kind of muscle memory type stuff. But now when we go out in the field, people don't want to have handcuffs on, so they're going to pull back and resist. And now that throws a wrench into some of the training techniques that we use, because if we went full force, you know, good guys versus bad guys, we would hurt people, and agencies are spending a lot of money to put their people in the academy classes, and so we got to return them healthy to the field training program. So we have to train in that, you know, at that level where it's really static, and we're not putting the recruits at risk. And so they get trapped in this mindset of, oh, everything's cool. I'm gonna put my hands on a bad guy that just, you know, committed a violent crime, and he's gonna go along with the program, until they don't until they get punched in the face or taken to the ground or inflicted upon some bad, major injury. So it's very, very difficult, and it's very, very eye-opening. So that's kind of when we're starting to, if you don't come with that pre-wired, you are going to become wired over time. And if you don't become wired that way, then you usually leave the profession and go try something else. So that's a very, very difficult thing that we have to address through each academy and each field training program when they return back to their agencies. Another big issue that we look at with the way people are wired, or way officers are wired, when I go to work, or when I went to work, nobody mattered, or the community did not care if I had an argument with my wife, if my dog bit the neighbor, my kids were acting up. Nobody cared. So I had to shut down all those emotions going to work, and every call for service that I went on, I had to make sure that everybody felt like they were the most important person, that I was dealing with at the time. So I was a master at shutting those emotions off. And then what happens when I start shutting those emotions off at work? Now I start shutting those emotions off in my relationships, whether that's with my spouse or with my kids or with my friends. And then who wants to be around me? And so it's difficult, but that's one thing that we have to do. Part of that is self-preservation. If I'm emotional and I act outwardly based on my emotions, and oftentimes we start making wrong decisions, and that's when we start getting into trouble, is when we if we have a bad guy that's yelling and screaming at us or me, and I turn around and with as much venom that's being yelled at me, I use against him, I'm in the wrong. And so I have to shut that emotion off and just conduct business. And so that ends up being an interesting rub when it comes to, now I have to take my emotional aspect. I need to try and regain that when I get back to the office. I walk in my door of my house, and I become a normal person anymore. But so that becomes very difficult, which transitions into the last bullet point here, which is I have been a master of compartmentalizing the things that have happened at my job. I've had multiple things happen at work, and I promise I'll dive into this when we talk about war stories. But can you imagine me handling a critical incident or something that is just awful at work, and then I don't put it in a little box, but I take it home with me and I unload on my family, or I unload on my spouse or my kids or my friends, that they're not equipped to handle that. So I've been able to put these things in a little box and put them in the back of my mind. Well, most police officers have that ability to do that. But when we're talking about mental health, at some point, if we don't address each of those compartments, there's disasters waiting to happen. And I know all of you in your job, you're seeing those disasters manifest right in front of you. Department leadership is seeing these disasters manifest right in front of them, and we've taken great officers and watch them compartmentalize over the years. The suck it up and get back out there mentality becomes really crippling to the officers that are sucking it up and getting back out there, or compartmentalizing everything. I think there's room for it, but I also think there's a definite need to chisel away some of those things in that are stuck in our compartments. So that's how, in my mind, that police officers are wired. We have to do those things for self-preservation, and which in turn is kind of a double-edged sword. In turn makes us cynical, makes us think we're better than everybody else. And so we end up crippling ourselves by self-preservation, by being masters of compartmentalization. It's an interesting topic to look at, and how do we fix that? Well, we're going to talk about that here in a minute. Well, let's talk about the types of calls that, gosh, are the most difficult for police officers. Any call, and I'm talking that those that really affect our mental health. And regardless if we're pros at compartmentalization, these calls affect us. So several years ago, I was a sergeant, a new sergeant, so it's probably close to 20 years ago. I responded to a call of a 4-year-old drowning victim. And I was the third person to arrive on scene. Two of my officers arrived first, and one of the officers was greeted by the father of the 4-year-old. And this father was carrying this lifeless 4-year-old in his arms, and he handed this officer his 4-year-old and said, help us. Well, little did that person know, that father know, that he handed his 4-year-old boy to a father of a 4-year-old. And so when the officer took this little boy in his arms and placed him down on the ground and started CPR, I'm watching this whole thing evolve. And so I immediately grabbed a hold of the officer and said, you go, you take care of the landing zone for the helicopter that we're going to call, and you take care of that. So I repurposed him for another task, so he wouldn't be exposed to that. And those are the type of things that when we deal with children, it is just gut wrenching, because they're so helpless and defenseless. And so they have a serious soft spot in our hearts. Anytime that we hear that it's a child involved in some type of incident, especially when they're in danger, we oftentimes travel a little bit faster to get there and work a little bit harder to make sure they're out of harm's way. But those calls affect us. That officer that was handed the 4-year-old, he thanked me later, but he was still impacted. Now, unfortunately, that young boy didn't make it, and so all of us reflected at our, to our own kids, and so that was a difficult situation. Motor vehicle accidents involving great bodily injury or death. As police officers, we respond to these calls, and I know we signed up for it, but when we see, when we see kids that are involved that are hurt, we had an incident happen in our city several years ago where a 18-year-old girl was driving on one of our main streets in town, and she was texting. And as she was texting, she was approaching a park that had a crosswalk that led from the park to a kind of a commercial area across the street where people use that as a kind of an excess parking. And this little 3-year-old girl had stepped down in the street just ahead of her mother, and her mother was trying to reach out and grab a hold of her. And as the little girl stepped out in the street, this 18-year-old girl was looking down at her phone, and she hit the little girl and her mom in the crosswalk. The little girl died at the scene, and the mom was broken up pretty bad. She was in intensive care at the hospital. We had an 18-year-old girl that her life as she knew it was over. And so we had to focus our attention to not losing this 18-year-old girl, but also sympathizing for this family that just lost their little girl, and the mom is in bad shape. But being a detective sergeant at the time, myself and another detective went to the hospital where the mom was and the dad was, and we had to sit in a room with that little girl who was lifeless on a gurney, and we had to sit in that room for about 2 hours with her as both of us who were fathers reflected on our own kids and how this was going to impact this family. And so those type of things, those vehicle accidents are pretty devastating to us. Death by suicide. I've had several suicides when when people I've known. Just recently, I had a 15-year-old girl that I've known their family for years and watched her grow up, and she committed suicide. And I can still hear the mothers just wailing, for her daughter and for her husband to get there, and then making that phone call to the husband and dad to hurry home from work, and then meeting him when he got there and telling him what happened has a deep effect on me. And as I talk about it, I still have that deep impact on my life, and so these type of calls, they mess with us for a long time, and I've been able to compartmentalize, but this is healing for me to be able to talk about it. And so thank you for sitting through maybe a tear or two. I had a fellow officer that,
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd like to interrupt. Someone asked the question, is it more difficult when your spouse or significant other is also a safety officer?
Yes, it can be. And the reason why I say that is because I've always tried to tell my the people I teach is who else works shift work like police officers and firefighters do. Well, that's other police officers and firefighters. And so so you take the issues that you're dealing with at work, and now you're bringing them to your friends that are also coworkers, and so you commiserate together, and so you never get out of that that circling the drain effect. And I know there's many couples out there that are both working in public safety positions that do great, but I also think that they compartmentalize and they try and separate the work and home life together. But I do see that in everyday relationships, just with peers, where all my friends are cops, and that's all we talk about is cop stories. And I've tried not to make that a part of my life, where I've worked with some of the greatest people that walk the planet, and I would sacrifice my life for them. But a lot of them I haven't been over to my house for dinner because that is a work thing, and I want to surround myself with something other than work. And so the reason why I say that it could be problematic is because you never get to leave that, and there's rarely that separation of work and home. And so I just just encourage those people and watch those people and make sure they have another outlet available to them. And so each of them aren't dumping on each other, but they have that other outlet. And I'll talk about that here in just a minute.
Okay, that goes perfectly with the next question. And the next question is, do you have counseling available to you after such horrific calls?
Yes, we do. And so right after I get done storytelling, my next slide is going to be about that and what happens in the aftermath. So I got you, and those are great questions. So as far as the other types of calls, we have the Smart Train that it's been around now for maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years in Rohnert Park. And we knew that it was just a matter of time that someone was going to be hit by the train. Now, is that cynical mentality that we're just waiting for it and oh my gosh, what's that going to look like? And so what do you think happened the first time that somebody, a pedestrian, was hit by the train? We had probably 12 officers and firefighters respond to that scene. And I'm going to tell you all right now, without being horribly graphic, that you will not survive a collision as a pedestrian with a train. Your body does all kinds of weird things that you're not expected to see, or not expecting to see when you get there. And so the first 3 or 4 pedestrian versus train accidents that we had, and a couple of those were suicide by train, we get 12 people going, and they all, wanted to go see, and then they, found some busy work to do, but they wanted to just be that guy or that gal to say, yep, I was there, I saw it, and then the damage it was doing to our officers. And because you can't unsee what you've just seen, you can't unhear it, you can't, unsmell it. And so those are some of the things that, we try and mitigate on our end as far as supervisors and command staff is after seeing my fair share, I said, no more. We're not going to respond like that. When we arrive on scene, there's obvious signs of death. Okay, obvious. When someone is split in two, that's obvious signs of death. So why are we subjecting our officers to, and our firefighters to respond and everybody concur? Yep, that's a dead person. We can resolve that by sending, one officer, one sergeant, and that's how we mitigated the mass response to our pedestrian versus train. I have a dear friend of mine that was a crime scene photographer, and he would come out and he would take pictures, and it ended up causing him his career because of just the chronic exposure that he had before these train accidents, and then the train versus pedestrians was kind of the sealing the deal. Mass casualty incidents. Now, fortunately, in my career, I haven't had to deal with a mass casualty like an active shooter or something like that at a school or a concert or a shopping center. But I know that we have people sitting in this room that are from more metropolitan areas, that some of your officers have dealt with those things, and not just once, but on multiple occasions. And those type of calls affect us because as you're running in to find the bad guy or bad guys, you may be stepping over the casualties that are laying down, screaming for help. And so that has a, traumatic effect on those officers that respond in. And, let me digress just for a second about how we're wired. I get it 100% that those officers that work for LAPD, that work for Oakland and San Francisco and these big metropolitan areas are wired different than the officers that work for the city of Rohnert Park or some of our smaller jurisdictions. Sacramento PD, all these big agencies that have, a lot more exposure on a regular basis. These officers are wired different, and that is basically survival mode for them because they, they're exposed to it more often. Officer-involved shootings. It used to be kind of a trophy that, oh, I was in a shooting and that was a thing. I can tell everyone, if I could, I'd look you all in the eye and say I never went to work one day looking forward to shooting somebody that day or being involved in an active shooter or officer-involved shooting that day. I had an incident that took me down to San Francisco several years ago, and it was a murder suspect that we were trying to find his location. The subject had murdered his mother, and hit his mother over the head with a baseball bat repeatedly, and then he fled. Well, he was at a girlfriend's house, or an ex-girlfriend's house in San Francisco. We ended up following some leads and making it there. As we were making entry into the apartment, I was having communications with the subject before we went in, but then he stopped communicating, and so we called SFPD to come in and help support us, because it was just 3 of us from Rohnert Park, and SFPD had a team of about 6 or 7 guys that were in the area. Well, they showed up, and there were 2 officers in front of me, myself, a San Francisco officer, another Rohnert Park, and then 2 more San Francisco officers. Well, as we made our way down this hallway in kind of the front entry, there was a left-hand turn, and the point officer, the San Francisco, peeked his head around the corner twice, and the 3rd time he did, 6 rounds came through a door and through the wall right at us. And we had no idea really where the rounds were coming from. And so we bailed out, and then the person that was actually right behind me in that stack ended up shooting the guy. He just graduated from sniper school and ended up shooting the guy when he stuck his head out the window. And so that was very troubling to me. And I'll add insult to injury. The first question my wife asked me when I got home was, were you wearing your vest? I was a detective sergeant at the time. We weren't expecting to see this guy or interact with the bad guy. We were just going to talk to an ex-girlfriend to see if she had heard or seen the bad guy. And now all of a sudden I'm, running for my life from bullets that I don't know where are coming from without a vest on. And so talk about the grief that my wife gave me when I got home. And she made a point to check every time I went to work to make sure I was wearing my vest. Those officer involved shootings, we carry those with us for a long time. Those are something that never go away. And then calls that shock the conscience. There was a recent call in Rohnert Park where a man committed suicide, and he wrapped a cable around his neck, and he sat in the driver's seat of his car, and he tied the other end of the cable to a light pole and drove as fast as he can until his car crashed. When the officers arrived on scene, they went in and to try and check for a pulse. The car was on its roof, so they reached in the driver's side window, and a bystander who was witnessing witnessed the accident said, "You're not going to find anything in there. The person's head is 100 feet down the street." Those are calls that shock the conscience, and those are calls that you can't make up. You can't you don't dream of those things until they're right in front of your face. And so those have a lasting impact on officers on how we move forward in our careers. And if they're not addressed, then we have issues. So this gets to the question about what do we do? What do we do for people that are involved in these incidents? And so initially, a good supervisor will have an immediate hot wash, and what that means is we're going to talk to the officers that are involved, and we're going to just debrief them right now, how they're doing, and if there's any public safety issues that need to be addressed outside the current incident, and make sure that these guys are removed from the scene, and that they're heard. We also have and many agencies are going this direction and have robust peer support programs, and which is specialized training to deal with those peers that may be suffering from whether it's a life crisis at home, or whether it's a work-related issue, or whether it's a trauma-related issue. We have peers that are in the department that, you know, it may not be a command level person, or it may not be a doctor or something like that, but it is a peer that can watch out for these individuals, and report back to you know, kind of the administrators of the program to make sure that they are getting the professional help that they need. And so those are becoming more and more popular, and more of a resource to the employees that we do have that are suffering from these calls that they're responding to. Within 24 hours of a critical incident or a major incident that we have, we'll have what's called a critical incident stress debrief, where we have a professional therapist come in who is a law enforcement therapist. If we had just your regular marriage and family therapist that came in to try and address the issues that are, you know, involved with these type of things, it's an immediate fail because they're just not equipped for it. But so we get a law enforcement therapist to come in. They facilitate a conversation. So it's mandatory for everybody to show up that was involved in the incident, but it's not mandatory that you say anything. And so typically what happens is we have the dispatchers that are involved, the officers that respond there, the ambulance crew that's there, the fire guys that show up. We have everybody that's involved, and then it starts from that immediate or that initial call for service that's received by the dispatchers. And so, because dispatchers are unfortunately in a position where they receive this call, they're hearing the panic, and then they dispatch it, and they're in the dark. They have no idea what happens next, or they dispatch the officers, then they hear the officers minutes later screaming for help, and so they're in a you know, unfortunate situation as well. And so we try and address them and get their we try and gain momentum by having one person talk, and then continue down the road of everybody kind of sharing their story and how it's affected them. And then after that, we follow up with the officers and have them, you know, meet with the police psychologist. And oftentimes we've taken guys off shift for a while until they're mentally, emotionally, physically okay to return back to the job. And so that is a huge way that we're taking care of our folks. And again, not saying suck it up and getting back out there, but it's a way to provide the assistance to them. And so I think that's a super important element of dealing with all officer wellness, is making sure that these few things are in place. And there's a lot more resources out there as well.
Jeff, question for you.
Yes.
Does the academy prepare the recruits for these type of incidents that they're going to be seeing?
So that's a great question. And so this has been a topic of conversation for several years now, especially because more of this critical incident stress debrief is becoming more mainstream. The peer support is becoming more mainstream. And so we want to, and we've been pitching to Peace Officer Standards and Training, who's our governing body for what is taught in the academy. And we have expressed our deepest concern that we're throwing these recruits to the wolves without giving them any kind of foundation. And so starting in January, there's a 4 to 8 hour block, depending on what your academy, how they, you know, squeeze in hours here and there, that is going to deal with officer wellness. And fortunately, I get to be a part of that at my academy, and I get to build this curriculum and program for our academy, and it's going to be awesome. And I can't wait, because although you can never, you know, expect, you know, or think about some of the things you're going to see, or imagine some of the things you see until you do, at least they'll have a platform now that they can resort back to, and they know that, hey, I can heal from these things because I know about officer wellness now, and I've got this foundation built. And so and when dealing with those issues, you know, I firmly believe that triggers are real. One quick story before we wrap things up is we had an officer come to our agency and he worked in Novato, before he came up to Rohnert Park, and several years before he came to Rohnert Park, he had gone to a 16-year-old girl that hung herself in her closet with a belt, and it really created some hardships for him. He had 2 young girls of his own, and it took him a while to kind of gather his faculties before he could do the job again. And then he came up to Rohnert Park. He was dialed in. He was a great guy until he got the call of a 16-year-old girl hanging in her closet with a belt. I was the street supervisor that day, and I'll never forget the look on his face when I arrived on scene. He came running out of the house and said, "Jeff, I can't do this." So I sent the other resources upstairs, and I wrapped my arms around him and hugged him, told him I loved him, and we addressed his immediate need. And so as we compartmentalize, if we're not getting the help that we need along the way, these things will be manifested through triggers. And and I wish I had a crystal ball to tell when those things could happen, but unfortunately, there is no police officer who has worked either a short, medium, or long career who has not been affected by the things they've seen, heard, or smelled. We're wired different, and some can do it for a long period of time, but they still can't unsee the things or unsmell them or unhear them. So I encourage all of you to be patient with us. In turn, we need to be more patient with you in the process that we're involved with when we're dealing or going through these mental health issues or sometimes crises. So we need to work together, and which is going to lead me into next week's session of this 3-part series, the importance of department leadership and support. And I've been on both ends. And so it's, as an officer, a supervisor, and a command staff level, and I know the importance of department leadership buy-in and that support. So I hope to see all you guys, or hope you get to hear me next week. So thank you so much for listening and being here today.
Jeff, I have one more question. This is kind of an oddball question, but it's being asked, and so I'd like to read it for the person asking. And it says, in cases of multiple safety officers being shot at and killed at the same time, is it better to have one funeral for all of them or individuals?
Wow, that's a tough question, and oftentimes that's determined by the family of those officers. It's most of the time that's left up to them. We're going to treat either one or all the same, but I think that's going to be addressed by the families. The families are really going to be the ones that drive that train. The departments will obviously help facilitate and be involved with the law enforcement aspect, that formal funeral ceremony, but really it's going to be a family decision.
Right. Well, thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. And Wendy, what a beautiful 3-part series you're putting on. I'd like to read something that someone wrote to us, and it says, thank you for this seminar. It was one of the best seminars I have attended. True! Explanation mark. My heart goes out to all those of service employees. Thank you. So people could feel your heart, Jeff, and we really appreciate that. Wendy, you have anything else you would like to say before I talk about the upcoming webinars?
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. We certainly appreciate you taking time out of your busy retirement life to join us and give some insight on some of the mental health crises that officers go through. We have a few more questions, but I'll go ahead and email those to you, and we can get those questions to the folks that answered them. But thanks
Great.
so much. I really
Great.
appreciate it.
Thank
All
you.
right, so we have more in the summer school series that is coming up. We have the WCAB procedures for hearings. And in addition to that, there'll be some tips, which is always a great thing to get. We always want to have some tips for our claims files. Identifying high exposure claims. We always want to do that, that's for sure. Medicare, we always need to do Medicare, and we're going to have a mid-year review on that. Here's an interesting one too, PD overpayments, how we administer, recoup, and prevent them from happening. So we have some really, really great webinars that are coming up. Please make sure to check the MacroPro YouTube channel for any playbacks. And to register, of course, you go to the MacroPro website like you did for this one. And then lastly, there will be the last two of this series, Cops and Claims with Mental Health. Until next time, I want to thank you all for joining us. Bye-bye now.
Thanks again, Jeff.
You're welcome.